appreciate everybody coming out today. This is an exciting day for us. I'm going to look forward to a really strong presentation here this afternoon, and I don't know if we have anything else we need to do before we kick it off and turn it over to our presenter.
We could just turn it right over.
Okay.
All right. Do you want to? Sure. Okay. Well, my name's Mark Beardable. I am principal in charge with KMB Architects, and I'd like to thank you guys for this opportunity to present this information to you today and let you have an idea of our qualifications and then answer questions. That's our format for today. And just tell you a little bit about KMB. We're a 40-plus person architecture and planning firm. This will be our 30th year. Next year will be our 30th anniversary in business. And I've personally been part of that for 27 years. And since our firm's founding, our core business has always been design and planning for public safety projects. And so that includes the full range of projects for whole new facilities that, you know, over $100 million in value, to medium range jail facilities, to small projects that might include the remodel of a booking area, say, for an example. And so we continue to do a lot of that. We do a lot of renovation and remodel design work. But again, the core focus and core business of the firm and our foundation really emanated from that, doing work for public safety facilities, for the state of Washington, for counties, and for local government. And so we look forward to the opportunity to work with both Grays Harbor and Mason counties, and we understand the charge that's in front of us in terms of the desire as part of this study effort to look at the individual needs of each county as far as the jail need goes, and then also then looking and comparing that to what would be the efficiencies and the advantages of a shared or a regional facility, and we'll talk about that in some detail as we move along. So a couple other, I guess, things about KMB is that our mission statement is to provide quality solutions through leadership, teamwork, and commitment. And so that's required on every project that we do, and we think that we've put a team together that can deliver that to both Grays Harbor and Mason counties. And some of you are aware that we also have quite a head start with having been sort of the go-to architectural firm for planning services for Grays Harbor County. And I think that we started that effort probably 10 years ago in looking at Grays Harbor's needs. And it was really a comprehensive needs on their law and justice facilities that resulted in a study that looked at not only the jail component, but also the courts component, offices, and also the juvenile component of that project. So the team that we've prepared for you today, and we'll introduce each other individually, but just in general, myself as principal in charge, Bill Valdez, who is here to my left, will be the project lead for the entire effort. And Bill, in a former life, before he came to us at KMB, was the West Coast Director of Justice Facilities for the DLR Group, which is a large national firm that does a lot of work around the whole country. And so we're really glad to have Bill in that role to help us produce this particular project. Also with us is Karen Chin, and she'll talk to you a little bit more about her qualifications, but Karen is really that national caliber justice planner, and she's gonna help us in that problem discovery and programming phase of the project. And then to my left here is Jeff Feeney here, who has been with KMB for quite a while. He leads, we also have a division within our firm that is an owner's representative and project management group. Jeff leads that group for us, and Jeff is currently engaged here locally with the school district in leading their efforts there. Kyle, raise your hand, Kyle. Kyle is also here today. Kyle is what we would call an alternative funding expert, but he's here to talk about what some of those options might be. And so thank you, Kyle, for being here.
That being said, in our proposal we talked about Jeff Tampkin was included in that. Jeff is the president of PFIC. Kyle is the vice president of PFIC with the rescheduling of the meeting. Jeff was not available, but we're very lucky to be able to have Kyle. He's an expert.
Guy you want anyway.
He's the guy, yeah, exactly. I would say that exact same way. So being able to have him here to be able to present with us, and that Jeff and Kyle will be involved in this project on the alternative financing and financing option side all the way through the project.
So other members of our team that aren't here with us today but are worth mentioning are Brian Little. He's an architect in our office that has been, a 27-year Grays Harbor resident, and he is the former building official for Hoquiam. And so he's our resident code expert that will be helping look at those issues with the project. And then Craig is our Mason County, he's like a 30-year Mason County resident. And we also have a division to our company that focuses on providing services to tribes in our region. And so Craig has managed that group for the last 10 years for us, and that's included quite a bit of work for Squaxin Island, for Quinault, and other tribes that we know are maybe some strategic partners for this. Are there any tribal members here today? Did I hear that? No? Okay, and so not only have we done a lot of for the various tribes, the governmental side of design work and the gaming side and some of that work, but we also have quite a bit of experience in the tribal justice design side, and I think that can also have an impact here as we look at bringing in some of those partners. And then Jason Berry is our healthcare designer in our office, and there's a huge trend to move away from the detention and into the mental health and treatment side for these types of projects. And Jason just lends a lot of expertise in that area, and we'll talk a bit about that, I'm sure, right?
Yeah.
And then of course, to assist the rest of our team here, we have a professional cost estimating firm. So whatever concepts or options that we develop as part of this study, they will be a really important partner to update that. If you look at the work that we did for Grays Harbor County, the costs in that now are 3 years so gone by, and so there's some serious updating and some refreshing that needs to happen there. But like I said, working on this effort for you guys is, we have quite a head start on the Grays Harbor side. We're really looking forward to connecting closer with Mason and bringing that our knowledge level up on that side as well, so that we can really do this project some justice. And we've also got a civil engineering should we need to look at any site or utility issues.
Commissioner, did you have that?
I just,
Yep.
Yes,
back, Bill?
you betcha.
I was just gonna comment, KMB did do some work for Grays Harbor County, and the presentation on that was done in January, maybe, I think it was March of 2015, and I was a brand new commissioner.
Yeah.
But when we went, about a year and a half ago to do similar proposal, we really connected with Bill, and then
Yeah.
when and we had DLR's proposal and KMB, so when this proposal came about, we kind of thought, oh, this kind of combines the best of both worlds. I don't know about Mason County, we've done a lot of work, I've done a lot of work with on flood mitigation and other flood projects with KPFF. They're a great firm to work with. Brian Little's great as well. So I'm hopeful that that we can move, my goal is to move forward on this and have it built before I'm out of office. Or at least before Travis retires. That's my main goal.
Well, we just started
10
a new
years.
term, so.
I did just start a new term.
So, just thank you for those, Commissioner, for those comments. Over my tenure at KMB, we've grown from a 3-person firm to over a 40-person firm. And that's been sort of a controlled growth over a fairly long period of time. And adding resources and intelligence and really trying to propel that firm to providing better and better service, more comprehensive, larger projects, and bringing Bill into the fold was really a natural step for us, and we couldn't be happier.
Well, when we had our conversations a year and a half to 2 years ago, stepping back to the 2015 presentation, it was a full meal deal issue for our campus, and we were looking at adding a 3rd Superior courtroom and some other things that the timing just wasn't right for us expense-wise for us to be able to afford it. But like I said, a year and a half to 2 years ago, when we were talking with Bill, I've met with Kyle on the phone and in person multiple times, and Jeff Tamkin. They've toured our facility. I think they have the answers that we need. We just need to figure out what it is we want and what that needs to look like.
So, and we're prepared to talk about those opportunities, and so we'll probably want to get to that. This is the study that you were referencing. Yep. So what we wanted to do was talk about ourselves, just to give you again a feel for qualifications here. And so I'll be brief. And that is that 26 years, going on my 27th year of experience. And as at KMB, we recently completed a regional jail facility for Nisqually that's focused on tribal justice, restorative justice, and mental health. We're currently doing some modifications to actually improve that in that facility now. On the study side, in terms of relevant project experience, the firm has done work for Franklin County. We've done work for Chelan Douglas County and some planning exercises on a regional facility there. We just talked at length here about the work that KMB has done for the Grace Harbor facility, Clatsop and Umatilla counties in Oregon. Pacific County, which is also another neighboring county, we did like a 10-year master plan for them, and they of course have, again, very similar issues with aging facilities and whatnot. So a lot of very applicable, relevant experience.
So I'm Bill Valdez. As Mark indicated, I've kind of focused my whole career on justice planning and justice design facilities. I've 20 years of experience just focused strictly on justice planning. As the commissioner indicated, I was in a prior life a principal at DLR Group. I'm very happy to be a partner here at KMB and being able to really advance my vision of what justice, especially here in the Northwest, can be, and for those type of facilities. So that's a passion of mine, has always been on justice facilities. I've been involved with over 100 justice facilities, from planning as well as all the way through design, and being able to constantly kind of move the needle for further and further and further for more efficient, more beneficial to the communities that they reside in type of facilities is really my point of view where I've looked. Also a big point of view for me, which I think has resonated a little bit with some of the counties I've talked with, is really a focus on officer-centric design, so really focused on the longest residing residents within any jail is always the correctional officers. And so that's my focus, is anything that we can do to better the environment, allow the officers to do a better job of what they're doing, is also going to be a mutual benefit to the incarcerated, the in-custody individuals within that facility. A similar type of project is this one here. So this is at the dedication of the Skagit County Jail up in Mount Vernon. That project started with the commissioners asking me to do a best and highest use analysis of their existing jail and looking at how they can expand it and grow it. Did that process, full program, full analysis, full cost modeling, then comparing that to a ground up brand new type of facility. It ended up being a cost neutral, but a new facility will allow for future growth. That's the direction they end up going with. They had decided to go out for a bond, passed with over 70%, I think 73% support. Then they were able to open the facility up, and at the dedication of the facility, they had over 3,000 community members come out to walk through the facility and show their support for that project. That's what a well-designed, well-thought-out, well-communicated correctional facility can do for a community. And that's what we would like to be able to bring to both of your communities.
I'm up next. I didn't realize I was going to be the oldest person on the chart. I've got 35 years of experience doing justice planning throughout the United States and a little bit of work in Canada, but mostly the 50 states. Friday will be my 26th anniversary of my own firm. Before that, I was with a large international correctional consulting firm for 9 years. So I'm the old person on the team here. I'm going to really focus when we get into the presentation, instead of showing you a bunch of pictures, because I'm not an architect, I'm the important part, the front-end planner part. And I'm going to kind of weave in some stories on slides when I talk about forecasting and talk about system assessment. But I have worked, again, for 35 years. All of my work is justice work. I don't do any, it's all government consulting. My two main areas, of course, are adult corrections and juvenile justice, and then also do some planning of law enforcement, police and sheriff's administration, those kind of buildings. So I'm very happy to be here today. I've got a good understanding of the project. I have worked on regional projects before, so the way I'm going to approach it in the presentation is it's really two studies, because each county needs to know exactly what it is they need and want, and then we come together and say, what is there a possibility of having a regional jail? But that's not done until we say, what does each county need individually? So with that, and I will weave in some more experience when I get my next chance to talk.
Hello, and as Bill mentioned earlier, I'm Kyle Hines with PFIC, which stands for Public Facilities Investment Corp. We're actually a developer of public safety and correctional facilities for cities, counties, and states, and we work nationwide. And we provide a complete program of design, construction, and then also tax-exempt leaseback financing as an alternative to traditional bond financing. So what our program does is essentially it transfers all that design, construction, and finance risk to our balance sheet, and we specifically focus with public agencies. So I've been with the company for 12 years. We've been operating since 1969 and have completed over 200 public and private projects right now. I've worked with Bill in the past on this project, and I'm excited to work at kind of rekindle the project, I guess we could say. And we're doing work with counties throughout the country. We're working with Montrose County, Colorado, Fremont County, Idaho, a few cities, and we're used to working with a lot of different public agencies teaming up together, so we know how to navigate some of the potential pitfalls or things that could be stumbling blocks for that. So we're excited to work and begin working on this project, and appreciate the opportunity to speak in front of everybody today.
Well, I can make Karen feel a little better. And that's very generous, considering that I just came from my 50th class reunion from the university this weekend. So how's that make you feel?
Yeah. Thank you.
I've been in about every form of the design business and management business over the last 50-some years. But that's not really what's important. I think the reason I'm on this team is since 2015, I've been coming to Shelton and Mason County every week over a series of projects, from the school projects at Greatview to all the Shelton School District projects, including all the bond planning and everything else. This has been my second home since late 2015. And so the reason that I'm here is to kind of lend an assistance with just things that might come up during the whole planning and working with together. You know, I've worked with the city, I've worked with the county, you know, I've spent a lot of time with Mike Patty, you know, from the fire marshal's office and different things. We've been involved with the airport and all the things that we've done in coordinating and how we built the school out at Chilton High School. So I'm here to say I'm kind of the most local, maybe that didn't come out right. Maybe most local, I better emphasize that. And hopefully I can bring a few things, especially when we talk later about financing. We talk about a couple of options. And I'll tell you a little bit about what might happen if you go through bond planning or go through the bond process, what's involved in this community. We were successful at Greatview, we were successful at Shelton, the school district. You know, if that's an option for you, you know, we want to make it successful for the county. So that's my role.
So we've got a few projects here that we wanted to just highlight and talk about their relevance for this effort. And this is the criminal justice facility study that we did for Grace Harbor. And this is the project that I had mentioned that really gives us a springboard and a really pretty good understanding of the justice system overall in Grace Harbor County. And we know that the task at hand here is that we need a jail facility that supports the whole justice system, right? And so we need to catch up with Mason County and build our knowledge there. And then, as Karen said, just use that information to build what efficiencies might exist in a regional facility. This project resulted in a pretty complex study that had about, at the time in 2015 dollars, it was about $58 million worth of improvements. The vast majority of that was in the jail cost. I think the jail costs for Grace Harbor County were somewhere in that $40 million range, and it was a combination of a new addition and a remodel to the existing facility. And so that's sort of the baseline where I think we can start from. Next. This is a project that we did in Thurston County for the Nisqually tribe, and it's just to provide an example of our experience working with different tribes. The focus of this particular project was on restorative justice, mental health, and treatment. And so we bring to the table an understanding of what tribes are looking for in a justice facility like this, particularly if they're going to be at the table and part of a partnership for a regional facility. Right. Next.
This is a current project that we're currently working on with Pierce County. So this is a master plan, criminal justice master plan and study. So it includes looking at evaluating kind of like what we did at Grace Harbor originally, was juvenile courts as well as adult. On the adult side, what we did is actually did look at long-range projections, long-range forecasting, started really looking at how their type of beds actually were within their different facilities, then evaluated and vetted how those existing facilities are actually operating, which ones, and create a stoplight chart, which was pretty much saying these cells are green, they're good, they have ADA capacity, they're in a unit of an appropriate size, they have all the other requirements needed, they are ACA compliant, all those, then yellow, and then red are non-compliant all the way across. So did that literally for their entire jail system, and then was able to then determine which of the facilities are probably most likely that they should actually take offline and which existing resources should they keep, and then we add on to be able to meet their long-range forecasted need. So a lot of those steps we're going to be doing at the same time for both of your counties, especially when we're looking at the standalone facilities, because there might be an expansion, renovation, phase type of work involved for each of your counties. Obviously, if you go to a regional, that's going to be most likely more of a green site that you're going to be developing a brand new regional facility. So there's a lot of similarities to what we're doing. Obviously, this is scale with being about 1,500 to 1,700 beds, a little bit different than the size that of facilities that you are currently operating, but still the methodology is still the same, and how we kind of go about programming, facilities analysis, forecasting, and planning. Those steps are the same, no matter if we're dealing with an 80-bed facility or a 1,700-bed facility.
Jeff, you want to talk about the bond program a little bit?
And this one, a little bit of order? Sure. Again, this is something in Mason County, the successes in bond passing have been up and down. I don't think there's been a big bond passed in this county or this city in many years until the high school bond that was passed in early 2016. What we learned going through that process is, and we can talk about this a little bit later, is this is a process that is about the people. It's about the community, and it's about educating those people in that community to get behind your plan. And if they're not behind it, you're not going to pass the bond. So if we don't learn their sentiments, their values, what they fear, what they think their needs are, if we don't explain that well to them and work with them and provide that information and give them the transparency they need, they're not going to come to your aid to pass anything to significantly raise funds. So the things that we've done is just come up with some successes in how we put together a plan or a process and how we take it to the community. And it has to work in both counties, because if you go that route, you know, if you were around here a year ago, you saw the difference between the Pioneers and the Hood Canal districts and two jurisdictions trying to come together. It was not successful. We have to be better than that to make it work. So that's something we're going to really focus on if that's the decision, the way that you want to attack finances. And we don't know that yet. We're just saying that's something we have to be aware of. So.
Then on the other end of the spectrum, on the financing side.
Yeah, so this is a project that I mentioned that we're working with. It's kind of in the same, we're just completing the kind of planning stage that we're discussing here today with Montrose County, Colorado. And this project was spurred on by the fact that they have absolutely no mental health facilities in their existing county jail facility. And they actually have to transport mental health inmates all the way across the Rocky Mountains to Pueblo, Colorado, because they closed down so many of the beds there. So we worked with them and did kind of a whole analysis of what their space needs and everything that they need for the next 20, 25 years. And what we came up with is obviously they need the mental health beds, but then they also need to have 16 max beds to meet federal admin segregation requirements. We worked with them to expand the intake, booking, and medical area because there was an extreme safety issue for the workers in the jail, because there was just not the salary, just the way they lined up, you would probably have nightmares about it. It wasn't good. So we worked on fixing that for them as well. And then also in the future, we did kind of a phased approach that yes, they're probably going to need 30 beds of community correctional space, but then also the growth on the western slope in Colorado called for that at some point they probably will need a 64-bed pod for both male and female, split up as needed on that. But so we're working with them to come up with at this phase we're actually going through some of the financing options like the bond program, or what we had proposed is using a annual appropriation lease for them to fund the project. So I can get a little bit more into the financing options that we provide in our programs a little bit later.
Great. Project approach.
Okay. Well, I think it's really important to start off with doing a very thorough and detailed system assessment and really having good information to inform decision making, because when you get to the end of this, whether it's one jail, two jails, or a regional jail, it's going to be a lot of money. So you certainly don't want to overbuild and you don't want to underbuild. And so looking at the population, and the first really important factor is really determining what is the demand, how many beds do you need, and projecting out for 25 years. And then once the information, I'm going to go into more detail, but once the system assessment is completed and good information data is collected, Then it's a matter of doing forecasting and saying, this is the system currently, what are the drivers within the system, and then developing various forecast models, and we'll talk about that in a minute. And not just saying 100 beds or 120 beds, but what kind of beds, male, female, what custody level, mental health beds, because certainly that's a huge issue across the country. And pretty much all the jail systems that I've worked at, either system planning or facility programming, there's a mental health wing or a unit because that's such a huge issue in our country. And then finally, once looking at the system, developing a forecast, then coming back and saying, well, I've looked at the system, are these some things you might want to consider that could impact on your bed count or what you would need in the future? Are there any alternative programs that you would consider or have been considering? Is there legislation or any kind of sentencing or other policy reforms that's going to impact on the jail? But really, mostly important about the third step, once I've developed a system assessment of the forecast, is to look at how can that forecast change if there's anything that you do in either of your counties would change in the future. And so, what's the next one, Bill?
You bet.
So when I say collecting a lot of data, I mean, I obviously want to be crime and arrest, and of course I collect that information, that's very important. But I find a lot of other things really impact more in our society now, the jail population. The first set is I take a look at in the jail and within the community, all of these kind of factors that I'm sure from the Sheriff's Department, you see that, mental health, homelessness, drug and alcohol addiction, mental illness certainly. A lot of people have experienced trauma. Domestic violence is an issue for all of our jails across this country. Poverty, lack of education, unemployment, all those kind of socioeconomic factors. I try to really get a good sense about this community and how that plays out in your jail, because there might be some alternatives for what you want to do in the future to deal with those populations. Certainly looking at crime and arrests, but again, I've worked in jurisdictions where the crime and arrest rate has gone down, but the jail population is going up. And I've also worked in places where the crime rate is going up and the jail population is going down, because some counties are saying we're going to deal with our populations differently, mental health or homelessness, or develop a pretrial intervention program or something else. So I certainly look at this data, but again, many other factors I think are important. Bail, probation, and parole practice, and we know because it's always in the newspaper, I think every week now about in this country, looking at our bail and bond practices, and if those are reformed, what would that mean to the jail population? And so I really drill very deeply down into both the jail populations to get a sense about that. Demographic, and overall, how's your county growing? I just finished a project, and I'm going to show an example, in Rockwall County, Texas, where their population was 32,000 people in 1995, and now they're over 100,000 people, so they're a very fast-growing county, and it really certainly played out in the jail population. Looking at law enforcement, prosecution, judicial practice and trends, because it is a criminal justice system, so what's happening in the courts, what's happening with probation or community supervision, what's happening with law enforcement, all that stuff really factors into looking at a system assessment and ultimately a forecast. Racial and ethnic disparities, we know that exists in our country. I look at that to say, are there things that could be changing in that regard? This is a project I did in Canada, but I also do a lot of comparative analysis, and this just looks at incarceration rate. And the overall incarceration rate in Canada is 90 people incarcerated per 100,000 population. But in the province that I was working in, Saskatchewan, it was 195.2. So sometimes it really helps to look at comparative data to say what is so different about this province where it's double what the overall incarceration rate in Canada. And they have an Aboriginal population in Saskatchewan, and they basically are incarcerated about 4 times the rate of the rest of the population. So that's driving this, and that coming out of this study is to say, do you want to look at that more closely in the future, because that's going to impact on how many beds you need. Looking if you have alternatives to incarceration, and also looking and understanding about what's available in the community for mental health, rehabilitative services, substance abuse, because sometimes I work in counties or in state master plans where the highest rate of commitment to or admission to a jail or a juvenile detention center is those places where there's absolutely no other services. So your only choice is either go home and hope they're show up in court date, or be placed in jail, because there's not a lot of other services. So I take a look at that as part of a system assessment. And then certainly recidivism rates, because we know that in this country we have a number of people that, and actually I didn't coin this phrase, but I love it, I see it in many jails, frequent flyers, that a lot of people who just keep coming back. And in fact, in Lucas County, which is a county I just worked in Ohio, 8% of the population of the jail was contributing to 25 to 30% of the bookings. So the same people, you probably know some people by name because they come back. So looking at that and how any practices that next one. So I just hope I get the point across that I like to look very comprehensively. plus I taught statistics in graduate school, so I like to look at numbers because I do think information is a really good way to inform decision making, so I like to collect a lot of data. But then in terms of moving towards projections, obviously all the stuff that's happening in the jail, historical trends on admissions, average daily population, average length of stay, and I do have comparative data from the country about what kind of is the average length of stay in a jail and admissions and daily population. And then getting into the offender profile characteristics, what they're in there for, what is the bail and bond practice, and how does that impact on length of stay, particularly for people who can't make the bond for low-level charges, so I try to tear that apart when I'm looking at jail population. Male, female, custody level, the pretrial sentence, behavioral characteristics, getting at mental health and other treatment needs that typically are prevalent in a jail. Do you have alternatives? What's happening in your judicial system? Because we know daily population is only a function of how many people you put in the jail and how long you keep them. So if we really start to drill down on anything you can do about admissions, anything you do about length of stay, that's going to have an impact on your daily population. And certainly I already mentioned crime and arrest. So when all this information on the jail populations in both counties and other socioeconomic data that I just talked about is collected, then it's time to start developing forecasts. And I do the forecasts in 5-year increments out to 30 years because, again, you don't want to overbuild and you don't want to underbuild. And I'm working across the country right now in a lot of jail systems where there's empty beds. I just was in Mecklenburg County, North Carolina last week, and they had built 2 90-bed, they're called sprung structures because they were so overcrowded about 15 years ago, and they're both empty now. And their jail population has basically been cut in half. So you want to make sure you don't overbuild, but you also don't want to spend all that money and then discover you're full at day one. So I do the projections in increments based on historical trends, and then I'm going to show you an example where I do some modeling about periods of time in history, if you're going to follow that pattern out into the future, or if you're going to have a low growth scenario, and I'll show you an example in just a minute. Then looking at any policy impacts, is anything going to change, any expansion to alternatives, anything out there legislatively that's being discussed that could impact on your jail population, and in the end develop a forecast that I call it consensus, because hopefully with the good information at the table and people reviewing it, the final decision that's made for how big this jail should be, or this jail or regional jail should be, is based on good information about the population in the future. And then of course disaggregating it to say, you can't just say 100 jail beds, it needs to be how many male, how many female, how many maximum, medium, minimum security, and break that down. I'm talking as fast as I can.
Hey, no, you got plenty of time.
Yeah.
Well, this is an example because I don't just develop a forecast. I typically develop 9 or 10 forecasts. And I know you can't read all these small numbers, but basically there's several models I developed. This is for Rockwell County, Texas, that I just mentioned. So it's out through 2035. And I have a high growth models, a moderate growth models, and a system change models, which means if you do want to discuss doing other programs or services or changing the way or who you're booking to the jail or change bond or bail practices, you could be at a lower number of jail beds. And this is an example, it's just a graph of average daily population in Rockwell County. Well, I'm looking at from 2008 through 2015, they basically didn't change their jail population at all, 170 to 176. So for like 9 or 10 years, it was very constant. And so some of the modeling for this period of time, say if this were to continue and then carry it out, you'd be at X number of beds in the future. Or if I start to look at what's happened in the last 3 years, you've increased your daily population by 75 inmates just in 3 years. So if this was going to continue, you could be looking at 370 or 385 inmates. So there will be choices, and I'll model different things about what's happened in the jail, and so you can make some good decisions about, do we want to go for a high, moderate, or a system growth scenario for the future, and then certainly also making sure that any jail capacity is programmed that you could add additional housing on without disrupting ongoing operations, and that's critically important. I think Bill might talk a little bit more about programming now. Let's see, I think I have one more slide I wanted to talk about, Bill.
Yep, that's the next one.
Because this is an example. I say net cost avoidance, but I worked in Sarpy County, Nebraska, about 10 years ago on a master plan, and they didn't have any alternative programs, and they were shipping their inmates to other counties because they were overcrowded and at a great expense. And so in part of that study, looked at some of the people in the jail and said, well, if you had any kind of alternative program, and could you consider a pretrial services program? And the sheriff was very opposed to it, not interested in that, but through working together as a criminal justice committee, they decided they were going to try it. They hired 2 people to run this program, so it wasn't free. And they were gonna have very strict criteria for certain people. Some obviously weren't gonna go into the jail, some could go home. But for that middle group that you just weren't sure about making sure they're gonna get to court or being supervised to ensure their appearance in court, they would have check-in requirements, they had urinalysis requirements until they would show up in court. And I came back 10 years later to update their master plan and was able to document, because I knew exactly what the population was, the jail days that were saved by the people they put on the pretrial service program, which now, by the way, the sheriff and the judges, everybody is 100% behind, and they have great faith in the two people who run the program. And what that cost in 2012 in dollars, and then backed out the money that it cost, and it did cost something to have a pretrial service program. But they were looking at saving, as you can see, each year up to and if I had updated, as I recently looked at, up to over $3 million a year savings. That's beds they didn't have to use, minus the people they had to pay to supervise people in the community to assure their appearance in court. So it was a huge savings. So that's an example I'm talking about that would be for consideration for both counties that might come out of the analysis. That it's not just saying, oh, how many beds do you have now, and just doing a trend line in the future and say, well, that's how many beds you need. It's a lot more informed to be able to say it's a very expensive asset in your county, and I hope that I will be able to do your system assessment and forecast and work with you.
You bet.
I just have if you don't
yeah.
mind,
Yeah, that's
just a
great.
quick question.
Oh, yeah.
So as you kind of said at the beginning, you take a look at both individually, and then you go to the process of kind of
Yeah.
looking at the joint or regional concept. How much, if there is a joint project that emerges, how much parity between programming then is kind of required between both counties? So how much alignment between our programming and Grays Harbors would be?
We just talked about
That's
that
hilarious.
this
We talked about that like an hour and a half ago.
Well, I'll start. Then
Go ahead.
First of all, we start off by saying you have to know exactly what your county philosophy and what, there could be some different philosophy about, one county might say, well, no, we're not interested in pretrial service. They've been arrested and they could possibly be detained, that's what we're going to do. And another county might feel differently. So that's why you do each one individually and come up with what's acceptable to the county. Then if it's going to be a regional facility, and depending on what structure it is, if it's a regional authority, and then if there's agreement on that that's going to be run by this regional authority between two counties, pretty much then you'll have to sit down and say, do you want to have, for example, a mental health housing? Do you want to have a program component, like some group counseling, maybe NA or AA could come in and have meetings at night, just a meeting space, or even what kind of housing, dormitory versus all single cells or whatever it is. So first you both decide what is preferable to that county, and then you sit down and say, what are those components that we're going to have to agree on if it's going to be a regional jail, that there will be some outdoor rec yard, that there will be this kind of housing, but we just talked about that this morning, because that's what it always comes down to when you're doing a regional study, that everybody, if you're going to have a regional jail, you will have to reach agreement on that.
Yeah, there will have to be a collaboration that ends up occurring, and what we're kind of talking about is that there might be some agreements. One county might say, no, we were in 100% support and we're comfortable with actually using a dormitory indirect or the dormitory direct supervision model. Someone else is like, no, we want to be able to be 100% celled jail facility, and we want to be indirect supervision model. So that's how we'll end up planning. That's how we'll be doing a programming individually. When we come together, there might need to be some agreements that get made. Well, okay, well, if we do a blended supervision model, okay, well, if we go to mini dorms versus actually doing full dorms, okay, I guess we'd be okay with that. So kind of working through all those variety of different options and kind of discussing what can you both be okay with how the facility would ultimately be run and how it'd be operated for your unique situations for your communities. But you will have to come to agreement on that. And when they're individual, you can just we'll program them and plan them and have those discussions to do it just how your individual communities want to be able to run it. But there will have to be a coalesce.
And what'll be good about this team, since I'm so old and so Bill and I, is that we can bring good information to the table about what kind of housing works. That some jails just say it's all indirect supervision, we don't want officers in housing. Others say direct supervision. Some people, dorms or not dorms. But there's good national research on many of these things about the effectiveness of various kinds of models, about the split. And even within ACA standards, there are the American Correctional Association standards of planning of jails. They will list about the percent of housing that should be single cell maximum, that sort of thing, and then and dormitory housing, how big a dormitory should be, and even if the dormitory could be split down with maybe half-height walls to break the density down. But we can bring good information to the table when you're having, unless there's 100% agreement from the beginning that both your jail programs look identical, and you say, well, we are in full agreement, so we know where we're going. But certainly we can help.
And I guess I'm sort of thinking, even broadly, more than just sort of the structure of the jail, but from a policy perspective, and the courts, and you mentioned sentencing guidelines and pretrial services. Pretrial is something we're open to, and I think our courts have been evaluating, implementing programming, and that kind of thing. But how much coordination between that side of it before people even end up going to a jail, should we be considering and trying to line up that side of the programming of it?
Well, we talked about this earlier too. When I've worked in studies where they say, might want our own, we might want regional. Usually the functions of law enforcement, courts, alternative programs, those remain in the county's, jurisdiction. I haven't seen very many places. I don't even know if I've seen any. Maybe for some programs that, but in terms of who, this county has the court system, this county has a court system. You've got law enforcement, you've got law enforcement. But now agreeing to, if it's a split of 80, I'll just make a number. One county has 100 beds, the other county has 80 beds. If one county is overutilizing because they're putting every low-level chippy charge and there's not enough beds for the other county, those are the things that have to be hammered out. And if it's a regional jail, there is a regional oversight committee that will be looking at the data and looking at the utilization, because it's not fair if you have a regional jail and someone's hogging all of the jail beds. So you do have to develop that. Here's the criteria for who's getting in, and if they're going to have alternatives, usually I see that's run by a county or that's run by your county. That doesn't. I don't tend to see that as much as a regional as the big service of the jail.
But there could be definitely programmatic functions like some pretrial services, some alternative services like work release or weekender programs, those type of things, which again, you don't want that population to be mixed with your sentence population or anything else. So if one county wants to be able to use those type of alternative programs, the other county does not, all that informs us is when we get to programming and having to dedicate square footage and area to it, we need to kind of plan for that, and then that will be planned around one county's utilization, while the rest of the facility for general population and specialized population housing of sentence or even pre-sentence that's not part of that alternative program, then that would be kind of a shared utilization based off of those projected needs. And so there's ways to kind of be able to get around it. So it's not like you both have to agree, we're only going to do these type of programs and these type of alternatives. There's definitely some flexibility, and we've seen that type of flexibility within regional jails and have some ideas on maybe how that can be done to be successful for both counties.
What's the nexus for the management that is talking about the regional model? I'm really curious how that works out that you've seen historically, what they've done.
Well, what I've seen is that there's like 3 ways to go, and that's one, that a regional jail where a regional authority is formed that will, is management of the jail, with of course both counties putting in input into terms of the cost per day, what look all the information I presented here, what kind of beds, who's using it, how long they stay. That's a regional authority. There's also a model where one county becomes the host county, and then the other county pays a per diem rate, either based on a fixed contract for a year or for 2 years, or just on an as-needed basis. And I see those arrangements very difficult to get across, because it's very hard for one county to be assured that another county is going to be paying and using the jail beds for the next 20 or 30 years, because each year that stuff is re-upped in a contract. So most regional jails that I've been part of working on, it's a regional authority that is formed. So not one county's not going to build 200 beds when they only need 100, on the assumption if everybody here gets unelected or re-elected or whatever, you can't put your own county at risk to say, we're going to build this jail twice as big, as we always know that county next to us is going to pay us money for our jail beds. So the biggest model is, I believe, is to develop a regional authority, or both go, do your own jail.
But with that, how would you, I guess, I'm curious as to figure out how it would be built out, or, if you got a regional authority that's been created, they're going to send a bill most likely or something, you just all agreed to that contract for 20 years, or?
Yeah, well, I mean, maybe we could have our finance guy talk more about it, but I mean, the logistics of it are that once it's decided that you're gonna operate a jail, there will be a cost-sharing approach to that, and that money will go to that authority to pay for the staff and the electricity and the food and everything that needs to run the jail once this has been established.
And then that regional authority also, just from an operations standpoint, that regional authority would actually be doing the hiring and staffing and doing all of those operational decisions on behalf of the authority, which the authority is then acting on behalf of its individual counties for its operations. So it is acting as an individual entity to itself. You know, it's essentially a quasi-governmental entity independent from the other two counties. So the counties would have to have some form of agreement written that we are going to continue to, you know, pay for our beds to this regional authority, and we're going to be renting our beds from that.
And I can see all that. The part that's confused me, I'm trying to figure out is what, let's say what happens if all of a sudden this regional authority stops controlling certain aspects of the spending and it becomes $200 per inmate per day. How does that get stopped or changed or brought back into a realistic amount?
Well, again, there's a regional authority, of which I would assume, obviously, both counties, would say it's just these two counties. You would need to be part of briefing on budget, you'd be going through this because it's a shared service. What I asked Bill and Marcus said, do you have any precedent in your county? Do you have any, in Virginia where I've done some regional jails, they have a regional transit authority, they have a regional water authority. You know, sometimes in states where they've got a lot of smaller counties, it's a precedent's already been set, but do you have any regional authority of any?
I think maybe a model that might be
Yeah.
similar would be our MACECOM, our 911.
Okay, so you have.
So that's a governance board that is
Over
made
both
up
counties? But,
Well, it's single county, but
Oh.
it's the city, all the fire districts that have elected representation, and so between there, they have a governance, I don't know, Mike left, but.
I'm here.
Oh, yeah.
I went to the cushy seat.
Yeah, but there's a governance and a legislative board that handles, you know, the finances and.
So I guess I'll look back, so when issues come up about, you know, there wasn't response time was slow or whatever it is, then there are members that are on this regional authority where that is reviewed and whatever are the issues need to be fixed and straightened out.
Right. The best way to think about it is that it's collectively owned.
Yep.
So everybody has membership in that oversight board, the two oversight boards, and I work for them. So I'm motivated by that. So it's pretty simple.
And just if you had your own jail and there were problems where, you know, cost overruns or use of overtime, which is a big issue, that would have to be addressed and bring your county back in line with, you know, the budget that you established. Well, it'd be the same thing, but on a little bit more complex scale, but you still would have input in that. But if all of a sudden your, you know, overtime is increased, you know, which is a big thing to look at, obviously in the jail budget, then that would be something that you would bring to the attention of the regional board and then have to make amends, you know, changes to that because you're members of that board.
You bet.
Thank you.
Great questions. So once forecasting is done, and once you actually have your projections and your quantity of inmates and beds analyzed for both the facilities, then we do what's called programming. With programming is then taking all that data and assigning bodies and people to those different requirements, and then there's area associated with people. So it's essentially if you have an office, that office is actually for a person that's filling that space. So then we have to go through an analysis of really looking at how big should each of those spaces be. So during programming, it's an interview process, so where we sit down with the different stakeholder groups and we're asking you a lot of questions about how you operate the facility, and a lot of this will already come out of, with Karen's work on the forecasting and system analysis. But we'll be wanting to learn a little bit more about the different people that are occupying those different spaces and what their function actually is. So then we can assign a square footage to their space that they're going to be operating within. We can do this through interviewing process. We'll also create some questionnaires that send out, which will help to get some of that feedback from the different stakeholder groups. We'll do staffing analysis, and Karen and I actually talked quite a bit about this, is that with each of the different solutions and how you go about programming the different spaces can have a staff and operational costs. So we are going to end up looking at those different options and the variables there. So if you end up going with a direct supervision model versus an indirect supervision model. There's going to be a quantity of correctional staff as well as management staff to be able to make those two models work. So that we're going to have to kind of work through and understand how you want them to operate and be able to create options that way. We'll also end up looking at staffing projections. When we look at bed projections, there's also obviously, as you add additional beds, you're going to have to add additional staff to be able to operate and supervise those beds as well. A big part of this with the area standards, we'll really be looking at area standards using ACA requirements for housing, but we'll also need to have discussions with the counties with regard to non-correctional standardized areas. So offices, conference rooms, break rooms, public facilities. Do you have an arraignment court or some other court to be able to facilitate not having to transport people in and around to your superior and district courts? You know, all of those type of things have an effect. They have an operational effect, they have staffing assigned to them, and they have an area assigned to them. So that's what programming is really looking at all these decisions that you made from an operations, looking at the people, and then the area that's needed. And then we end up kind of tabulating them by its use and its function to be able to really understand what that area actually is and what's needed for that facility, just like what Karen was talking about on projections and forecasting. We do it incrementally. For Pierce County, we're looking at 10-year increments because there's a little bit bigger type of study, a rough order of magnitude on the master plan. But we'll end up doing it the exact same way. 5-year increments, we'll be looking at seeing how your area growth is actually going, along with the staffing increases, along with the bed increases. And that will inform us when we decide to go to the next phase, which we're planning. How much area do we have to plan for and design around? And that's really where a lot of these, we have a lot of flexibility, because depending on the different model and utilization, obviously dormitories on a per bed calculation is going to be a different amount of area that's needed than if we end up going with single bed housing. So those will have cost effects, they will have area effects, and we're going to really be able to work down through that interview process and discussion process to really see what's ideally suited for your individual counties as well as a shared facility. So that's kind of our big idea.
One other thing I would like to say there too, Bill, is that of course the charge is to look at both counties individually and at the regional solution. And so you can see that we're actually building square footage that results in physical space, and that will change with a regional facility because you only need one kitchen, right? Whereas if you're doing it individually, you have to have two. And there was some talk about, you know, meshing programs and looking at system change. There's a lot of efficiencies that can come out of a regional facility that'll be highlighted at this level when we get to actually developing square footage components for the project.
Yes, exactly. Great point, Mark. We were also asked to kind of look at kind of what our anticipated timeline, what the schedule would be. So this is just a graphic work plan and schedule. So here we are, and we're in February, about the start of March, assuming about a month or so for our contractor award and approval process. And then as Karen indicated, there's a lot of data gathering that we need to be able to give. So be providing that to you in the list of information that we need to be able to give. Have a couple of weeks to lead up to that. Then we'll have a kickoff meeting, and each one of these blue blocks is a meeting that we end up having. So obviously, you see, this is a very hands-on process. We're going to be meeting with you quite a bit, and we have to pretty much do this as 3 separate studies because we have to do it with each of the counties individually as well as having conversations with you as a group. So going through with the series of meetings. As Karen indicated, quite a bit of work here up front on the system assessment, population forecasting, really looking at alternatives and program analysis. What other things have we investigated or do we want to investigate to help with lowering population mounts? Go through programming and the needs assessment I just talked about on the programming to assign square footage to each of those. Once that square footage is assigned, going through probably about a month and a half to 2 months of concept design, really looking at options for both the individual standalone county solutions as well as a regional solution. And this will be us bringing some options to you for all three of those tasks, getting feedback, going back and modifying them, revising them, adding to them, maybe doing additional options based off of the feedback. And then once we kind of get to a point where we think we kind of have a good idea of kind of preferred options, then we're going to have a conversation about schedule and delivery, because that's going to end up having an effect on cost. Are we looking at possibly doing these facilities here next year to make sure the commissioner could have the facility there before she retires? Or are we saying we're going to end up kind of putting this off and starting these projects in 5 years? Because that's going to have a cost impact with escalation. We also need to be able to look at delivery. So are these going to be done as being hard bid projects? Are they going to be using alternative delivery with the CM at risk, or going as a design build? Because those will have an effect on overall construction duration, which has an effect on cost. So we need to have all those answers in place, and those can be done independently. One county can say, we want to deliver our project if it's done independently this way. The other county can do it a different way. So we will kind of work through all of those with regard to schedule and delivery. And then we'll end up starting to go through, which we're about to talk about here shortly, funding options. So now that we know roughly cost, we know roughly schedule, how is it going to be funded? Is it going to be through public voted referendums of either tax levies or bonds, or is it going to be through a privatized financing solution, or something in between? So we'll be able to kind of go through those options. Then we'll be developing a draft report, be able to sit down, review, get feedback, and then be able to finalize a report. So that's kind of the big picture. We think this is about 7 months or so to be able to work through all that integration with the two different counties, and have plenty of time for each of the counties to really consume that information, really think about it, be able to provide input back to us, and us enough time to then distill that into the next phase of the project. So this is kind of how we kind of look at this from a big picture, from an overall schedule of the process. And then with that, project financing. So
Can you go back to that work plan for just a second, Bill?
you betcha.
I think that's interesting is you listen to Karen and you see all the stuff that you're going to go through and process to come up with numbers to make determinations, and you're going to be looking at sites, you're going to be looking at plans, everything. There's a lot of work that has to be done to get over here before we start talking about what costs are and how to fund it. But that doesn't mean that we aren't doing something with your local communities about getting them involved. Because if you wait out here, it's too late. Because if you engage the community here, they're behind the curve. And they're going to say, wait a minute, why didn't you tell me this? You know, so I want to say that even though the schedule says, here's where we start really putting numbers together, it's because we haven't got the numbers to talk about. That we need to start working, what we say, working the crowd. We need to start working the crowd early. Because I've been here, I've asked people in the community saying, hey, just out of curiosity, what do you know about the regional jail that's being proposed? You know, they're like, what? I mean, we've got to get on that. So now I can go through, see, I can't see the arrows without my glasses on, I'll let you go. So if there's two choices here of how we can fund it, I mean, there's many choices. How many have been involved in a bond project? Okay, so you've been through, I mean, yeah, you don't count. But there's a lot of work. I mean, quite frankly, there's a lot of work. But this is a decision the counties are going to make. If it's turned out to be individual county facilities, each county may do it differently. If it's a regional, you're going to decide which is the best way for your constituents to get behind it. But what's important is, you know, we have to keep a couple of things that are really important. How does the community feel about tax rate increases? We know that Mason County is growing. There's a tremendous amount of housing going on. They just opened another division out by the high school. I heard they're selling like 1 or 2 houses a week out there. That's great. I mean, that's great for Shelton. For Grays Harbor, I mean, there's lot of opportunities in Grace Harbor for growth. But I think what's important is you have to make decisions this is kind of an important decision that has to be made for your constituent. Do you want to be the owner or do you want to be the leasee? That's huge. That's going to affect the way people think about the project going in. We want to look at, how do we message? We got to focus on what type of facility this is going to be. We were talking before about, in this county, having gone through a couple of bonds, there's fears. I mean, the taxpayer has fears. I don't want my rate to go up. I'm on fixed income. I don't know if I'm going to keep my job. I mean, maybe that's over now and our economy is getting better. But there's fear. When you built the Shelton Correction Facility, it wasn't the easiest facility to get through this county because there was a lot of fear. We're going to have criminals in our backyard. So we've got to be able to reach those people and educate them. And it's just not about taxes and dollars. It's about what is the program and what is the benefit to the community if we build this facility. Again, what Karen was talking about, does the crime rate go down? Isn't that good for the county, for both counties? So that's the stuff we want to get into. And then once you get the people behind it, whether you go private financing or whatever, you go with a bond, you have to get the acceptance and the support and the sentiment of the people behind you. And they've got to be with you. And you've got to be transparent and you've got to count. And whatever you do, whatever you promise your constituents, you have got to deliver. I guarantee it. How many of you know Dr. Apostle at Shelton Schools? Very few of you have seen him. He's famous for saying, here what we do is we under-promise and we over-deliver. And that's the secret to being transparent with your community. If you promise them this and then say, well, we didn't get enough funds, we did whatever, we can only build this, you've got the county, the people, the voters are not behind you anymore. So we have to be very careful that what we talk about is what we can deliver, what we can finance, what we can put out there in the community. And then finally, if you go with the bond, obviously, it's all or nothing. You don't pass the bond, we go back to the drawing boards and we come back to have to redo it again. And we don't want to be there. I mean, we've been through that here in this county and we were successful saying we have got to do it right, we've got to do it one time or it is of no value. Okay? And that's kind of the bond process. I think this community is open. I mean, I think this last year, since 16, there was a big change. The superintendent here said, we'll be lucky if we can pass $40 million bond. And we passed a $65 million bond. It was work. And I'll tell you, the success is based on a lot of you because we armed the superintendent with flyers, brochures, charts, graphs. When he went to the chamber meetings, when he went to Rotary meetings, when he went to the downtown community meetings, whatever it was, he had stuff with him. And that is going to be part of getting that message out to people. As you go to your meetings, your associations, your community meetings, you guys are going to be armed because you're going to be the carriers of the message. And it's just not going to be somebody else doing the work. You're going to be part of it. And that's just going to be part of the whole bond planning process. Kyle.
Thanks, Jeff, and I'd like to reiterate that. No, I was going to reiterate that. And all of our programs, we feel that community engagement is probably one of the most important things for a successful project. We've done parks projects, we've done school projects. In Montrose County, when we were doing the planning of that, we had citizens come in and speak about what they thought was the most important thing and how they wanted that facility to look like themselves. But just a little bit, so it is, I mean, for any project that's using public funds in any manner, that's just one of the most important things to make sure that everybody in the community is all involved. But as far as our program, we're developers and also provide financing, so a lot of our program advantages come from our 50 plus years of development experience. So, but the main thing that we're talking about here is the ability to provide an alternative source of funding that doesn't typically require voter approval. And this might be, and so obviously it sounds a little strange at the beginning, but in this situation with two counties both having to possibly go out together for a bond referendum, this will streamline the way to possibly get this project done, because there'll be we have a nonprofit entity that would actually serve as the owner of the facility and then lease it back either to the authority, or we could have the authority that may be created own the facility and then sublease the facility back to both the counties. And this would be a way that there'd just be one entity as opposed to, you know, 2 bond referendums, who timing all that out, maybe one doesn't work together. So this is a way of coming up with all the funds at the outset, with one single entity issuing these the financing at tax exempt rates to be able to kind of streamline that process. And that kind of solves some of the, well, who owns what discussion that we had earlier. And I would say that it'd be a single entity and then either subleasing to the counties or a structure that works. And I'll get into some of the cost control things in the next slide. But so essentially what it does is it transfers the design, looking up which delivery method we want to use, whether or not CM at risk or design build. We can take full charge of that and make sure that we come up with the right solution for the project. You have complete control. Both counties have complete control over how this project's going to look using this program, without exerting too much of your resources on the whole development process. Because PFIC, us as developers, and KMB and everybody involved in the project, all we do is design and build facilities, but you have so many other projects to worry about, or other things to worry about, such as community engagement, public safety, just administration in general. So we focus on the design and construction and the financing of facilities, while the public sector retains oversight of the things that they're involved with. And so we can streamline the procurement process, like you said, while all the interviews are taking place, the programming's coming up with. We can streamline that whole process, because while we're doing that, we can take a look at the financing options, the funding options, figure out what's right for the community, and in the same line, preventing the project from being over-designed. By doing the programming at the outset, we can kind of say at that time we can take a look at what cost estimates might be, and then show you exactly what a potential lease rate based on a project of that size would come at just estimated market rates. So, and then finally, one of the last things is that if we use either county's land, we don't have to take title to the land. We don't need to purchase the land. We just ground lease the site on an unsubordinated basis for the life of the lease. So some of the finance. So the leaseback financing highlights are they're at tax exempt rates. They just mirror what the county would borrow at. We also structure lease terms up to 35 years. Shorter terms are possible, but the lease is also subject to annual appropriation of each county, and that's so that you don't obligate future councils to spending this lease payment. So annual appropriation, we're fine with that. We understand that that's a requirement. We also have short-term financing available too. So say we want to fund this project to get it off the ground, lock in construction rates, lock in today's interest rates. We can provide a short-term finance solution that could potentially be structured around potential grants, or if there's a bond referendum coming up in the future that may not be tenable within a year or two, but say 5 years out. We can have this financing structured around that potential bond issue to pay off the lease payment. And same with bond referendum, we provide 100% of the project cost. The lease payment is flat throughout the entire term, never goes up. PFIC, we don't make any money off the financing. We just charge a program management fee similar to KMB and everybody else involved, because we understand as soon as we start adding points to interest rates, we're kicked out the door, because why would you pay more than what the counties would borrow at yourselves. So then, as I said, you can prepay the lease at the cost of the leaseback finance anytime. There's no fair market value structure. It's just whatever the remaining balance is on the financing. And if you go through the whole term, we just transfer the ownership of the facility back to the county for $1 at the end of the lease term. So it's a lease purchase installment.
I've seen this before as a port commissioner years ago, but nothing of this scale. How do you get the initial purchase? Because the scale is so huge, it's different from a $200,000 building that somebody's selling back to the port and able to keep their, don't have to pay taxes on their interest and stuff that they receive.
So we issue just a lease and it's based on the credit of the lease payment, the facility, not the land, and then the funds from the lease payment are what we just use as security for the leaseback financing. We work with all different types of financial institutions, investment banks, pension funds, insurance companies. We don't have one set way of doing it because we will press the market to make sure that we get the absolute best rates, similar to a publicly offered bond. We'll do the same thing on our program to make sure that we're getting the most cost-effective rates. We can also fund all the furniture, fixtures, and equipment. Technology is such a big, important part of correctional facilities, so that can be included. And then we can structure it around the county's revenues and cash flows, because maybe there are existing bonds or existing leases coming off due, and we need to kind of ramp up the lease payments. We can structure it around that as well. It's all an open book. We're all on the same side of the table, and you can see we're completely transparent on how we structure it. So that's kind of how we work, and we continue to review all the different options that are out there, and we'll come up with the best method and source of funding to meet both Mason and Grays Harbor counties' financial needs for this project. So that's in a nutshell what it is, but structured kind of as a leaseback, so with a single point of contact and ownership there.
So just a couple of final notes before we move to Q&A. So K&B, we're a local firm, vested in both the Grays Harbor and Mason County communities. We've got staff that live in both communities. Personally, my wife grew up on a farm up the Wainuchi Valley, just a few miles outside of Montesano, the county seat there in Grays Harbor. We still have family there, and the reason why I mention that is that we come at a project like this understanding how important it is that we're that attentive and responsive consultant, that we do what we say that we do in terms of an agreed project schedule and an agreement for services, and that's what we're prepared to do. So in addition to being that local firm, we're also the firm with the expertise and the project history and the background to undertake the effort, with a national expertise to really help us make sure that we're providing very high performing services for a successful project. So thank you for this opportunity, and we're ready for questions.
You bet. Okay. Thank you. Just one quick question before we move on. Certainly interested to hear thoughts and questions from everybody else. So I saw you did this Nisqually project, 400 beds, $25 million. A summer or two ago, we toured Skagit's jail.
Okay.
Beautiful jail, for
Yeah.
what it's worth.
Appreciate it.
That was quite a bit more than
Yes.
the 25 million. Are there cost differences between doing a tribal project versus a traditional
Well,
municipal?
the main difference there was that if you toured the Nisqually, there was an emphasis there on minimum security and dormitory housing, and you could get some serious efficiency out of that. That was also constructed right in the middle of the recession, so the dollar value was extremely high. So it was quite a bargain when you look back with that hindsight. And a lot of the areas in that was, again, focused on minimum security, so there was a lot of stick frame, wood frame, metal studs, construction, a lower cost construction in that project than there would have been in Skagit.
In Skagit County was about 80% of it was celled, with a smaller portion which was really for inmate worker and work release with dormitories, and I think the largest dormitory there was 42 beds. So again, just 4 small dorms ranging from 16 to 42, with the majority of it actually being celled.
And
so that has a cost effect.
So I think Nisqually was probably more like a 60-30 or a 60-40. So you can see that I think that plus the type of construction were probably the biggest drivers.
Yep.
Great. So at this point, just kind of open it up for questions if folks have them.
I have a question.
Sure.
You talked about the group about doing individual plan for Mason County, Grace Harbor County, and then a joint or regional component. My question would be when you do that regional component, I'm assuming that you're gonna get all the players together and have some multiple conversations there, because while the commission, the Board of County Commissioners from each county will ultimately make the decision, we need to have buy-in from our judges and from our sheriffs and such to a certain level.
Yeah.
And there was you brought up pre-jail services, I think
Pre-trial
that's it.
services.
Pre-trial services. I have no idea what that is, Travis,
That's
so.
because we do not have any.
So those type of things, and then the components of whether or not, I guess doing a regional, facility is attractive to me, because I think we can come together collectively and have a bigger bang for our buck, number one. And I'm not afraid to compromise to be able to do this. One of the things that I'd like it to consider is, I'm not sure about your juvenile detention facility, but I'd like to include that component in with a regional jail. I mean, I know where we're at. We're in a tsunami zone right down along the river in Aberdeen, is where our juvenile facility is. So to have that combined, there's some aspects to that, and I just want to make sure that that we address the issue that Randy brought up, and also Commissioner Schutte brought up, when there could be differences and such. I think that
Juvenile or criminal justice or juvenile justice system assessment, I mean, the steps that I went through today, it's absolutely required, not just elected officials, but those, I call them a criminal justice coordinating council, a committee, whatever, because it's a system. You can sit here and make the best plan, or the jail can make the best plan, but the judge does the sentencing, the officers do the arresting, the jail houses the inmates. You've got to all sit down at the table together in each individual county with everyone within the system, public defender, prosecuting attorney, everyone there. I also like to include, when I have those meetings, people that have a real good understanding of the mental health and substance abuse, other treatment needs within the community. And when I'm doing juvenile facilities, certainly have education at the table, because that's a federal requirement in juvenile facilities. So have that for Mason County, have that for Grace Harbor County, and then bring together a larger forum of both counties when the study's been done, to say, now we've looked at what we need, now we need to put on the table what we can do together. Are we so far apart? Where are we apart? Where are we together? And then hammer those issues out. So that's an absolute statement. Now, something you just mentioned about juvenile, I do juvenile consulting across the country and plan facilities. The detention center at adult, and there's federal law that there could be no mixing of adult, yeah, it must have
Right, there has to be
absolute site,
separate,
right.
yeah.
And so in some places where I've worked, and they'll say, well, maybe if we do this, our kitchen or our, some things like that, we can serve the juvenile. And quite frankly, usually, I don't know about your community, your advocacy groups here, but any mixing of that population, even if they're driving in to the Sallyport after an arrest to drop a youth off, and if the jail is next door, they can see them, or if there's a rec yard for juveniles or adults, and they can see the adult inmates going in, it's all against federal law.
Yeah,
So,
I understand that
okay.
completely.
Oh, okay. But you're just saying you wanted to have it looked at, maybe another location, or maybe it would also be a
Well,
regional.
Be a
facility.
regional.
Oh, I
Be
see,
a
okay.
regional,
Quite possibly, yeah.
right.
Maybe in a separate site, but you're saying the
We
same
probably
kind
have
of
some room
approach.
for you in ours.
The what?
I said we probably
Well,
have some room for you in
our-
ours. We have like
We,
average daily population of like two.
ours is like 5 or 6, and we're
Yeah.
both spending well over $1 million a year
That's what we-
for
Yeah.
10 people a month. And I mean, we even we contract for the Quinault Indian Nation and Pacific Counties juvenile. And I'm just trying to think, well, should we do this in Thurston, or, looking at what options there are.
Historically, for us, our judges were not happy about us trying to take ours somewhere else. We've never entertained the idea of bringing somebody else's here. But our facility is awful, it's a trailer, I think. That's been- Yeah.
Oh, triple,
Yeah, but we've actually had some upgrades and stuff in there, and we could handle the capacity easy enough, because they have to pay people to be there anywhere. I think it'd be worth
I
having
think
a
it's
discussion.
a worthwhile conversation. We've
So
been
the-
wanting to have a conversation around reforming that. for a
Yeah.
while.
So I'm just gonna venture to say that that, that your judges wouldn't be happy to, for lack of a better term, outsource those individuals elsewhere. Ours may very well feel the same way. I did say if we had a substantial piece of property where they could be sight-sound separation between the two, would the judges be willing to, you know, first of all, looking at just an adult jail facility, I went and talked to our judge, our presiding judge, to say, is this something that you would be interested in? Because if you're not willing to do video arraignments or, you know, those type of first appearances, those type of things, it isn't even worth our time to look at this.
That's exactly right.
And Judge Edwards said, yes, absolutely. If we could do video arraignment now, I would do it. And I said, what about for juvenile? He said, yes. So I know that there's a willingness there. I don't know about the judges on your end. I don't know about,
We had a tax that actually had specific verbiage in it that they hold us to, about having it be a local juvenile facility. And when we've talked about it in the past about making something regional, they brought it back to us and reminded us, no, and what we passed with the people that asked for that specific tax, it said. So that's where we have been stopped in the
Well,
past.
there's also an issue that nationally that, you know, the evidence is very clear that certainly for the jail, what comment you made, if you're gonna move to a regional jail, if there's no video arraignment or some way to cut down, because the jail is 75% pretrial population, so they gotta go back and forth to court. And if you're 30 minutes away and nothing can be done except for putting them in a van and taking them to the court all the time, then that's gonna cost a lot of money. So certainly having video arraignment in a secure jail to at least make the first appearance or set bond, whatever. But that is completely not best practice with juvenile, in the juvenile justice arena, there's much research that would say the impact of the judge's face to the youth, and to the point where I know a couple of facilities I've worked in where they put in video, you know, a room within the detention center. Well, for example, I'm working in San Francisco now, a 160-bed facility that has 39 kids in it. So this issue of juvenile justice is the opposite of what couldn't build it fast enough, fill it, and now they're all sitting half empty. But those video rooms have never been used, and even in state, in rare occasions, but in general, is a matter of court, and of course, youth have to have that first hearing within 48 hours of being placed in custody. So that's a lot of turnover for having to do a detention hearing. But if you read the impact of a youth offender, to have a judge, I'm looking at your face as opposed to a TV screen, there's a very strong national focus within the juvenile justice in my professional community, the Annie Casey Foundation, MacArthur Foundation, to not allow that for youth. They need the face, and they need the voice, and they need the judge in front of them. So that's just one thing I'm going to point out. But certainly on the adult side, that would be something you'd want to have.
Chief, how's ours, because we didn't used to have it, we're doing it now.
District court's even doing it now.
Are they very successful, you'd say? And
Yeah, it's pretty good.
we didn't have it up until just a couple of years
You
ago.
mean for the adult population?
Yes.
Yeah.
But she made mention that she still has to have a little bit more conversation with her judges.
We
Very
transport
successful.
over 100,
yeah, we
on
don't
average,
have,
100 plus every Monday to Superior Court.
They're not doing it?
through the
Wow.
public courtyard.
Yeah, right through the mixed.
Right now, we don't have an elevator that works in the
How
jail,
many
so they're
people
having to
is it?
come downstairs.
God, it feels so good.
Sometimes not.
Or a lot of
Sometimes
trips.
The judges will accept or not accept.
Yeah.
There are some places the judge will not, or they do not accept being on the video. They want that face-to-face, and they believe that that's the way it's supposed to be done. Other judges say they're fine doing that, so that's an independent, sometimes decision by a judge.
And it's not been a philosophical issue for you guys to have video arraignment, it's just been a matter of, you just need 5 of them.
I don't know that it's ever been broached seriously.
We need programming space to facilitate.
Okay.
Yeah, you have to have room.
We could do what we do, we take your indoor rec yard, and you have 3 rooms to the inside of the indoor rec yard, thereby reducing the size of the indoor rec yard to make video arraignment rooms.
Tiny ones.
There's also a holding cell.
The 2 people can't hardly fit in. Oh, we got a holding cell. I think, on a positive note, I think that both sheriffs think very similarly about operations of custody facilities. So I think that that's gonna be a huge advantage to both counties working together, because we all know that the way the facility is operated drives the construction of the facility and how, and what the needs are of that facility. It's all about how it's operated, and the philosophical ideations about how that's gonna happen. So, fortunately, Chief and I have been working together for several years, and I know that him and I see eye to eye on operations of facilities.
Yeah.
So that's super
Well, that's
important.
very
and that's-
important.
Yeah, and that's.
Very important.
Dress alike,
Dave Cobb-
styles.
Dave Cobb is here.
Same haircut, the same barber.
And what the point that you made, just a comment down here to say that some judge, because okay, the juvenile side, again, the research is very clear, but on the adult side, there are some judges that still say, you know, this is their form of justice, they deserve to be in front of me, I'm gonna make a different decision when I'm talking to someone on a TV screen than when I see his face right up this close. So that's also why it would be so important to get both criminal, whatever you wanna call your oversight committee or a coordinating council or whatever, at the table, because judges are gonna have to agree, and, or if they disagree, to talk about, you know, these are the instances we're not going to allow video arraignment or whatever, so everything's on the table, because again, it's a system, everybody has to talk about it, because nobody's in control of just one part of it.
Were you guys involved in the public education piece of the schedule?
Yes, I was involved in that.
You were involved in that?
Mhm.
So we spent a good day at their Skagit talking to them about how they developed that project, how they started, how they garnered community support. And that whole piece, it started years before that project was even the first shovel stuck in the ground, like you were saying. It was very successful.
Yes.
And part of that success was based upon programming and recidivism and trying to focus and develop that jail so that you had additional program space to do mental health counseling, to do NA, to do AA, to do those group service programs, and that's how they sold that to the community up there.
Right.
So that was good to hear that you guys were involved.
It was really all about, and that was really what made it very successful, was it was a consistent message and it was a regular message. So it wasn't just waiting until 4 months before the bond, and then all of a sudden you're kind of pushing out this message to them over and over and over, and they're like, okay, I heard it, and I still don't understand it, and whatever. It started, like you said, years before. So up in Skagit County, the county as a whole had a quarterly mailer. That quarterly mailer went out to everybody within the county and just had general county information. So being able to plan, being able to use that, to be able to use a portion of that mailer to be able to educate the community on the issues, whether about recidivism, about the projections, all of those type of things. So that is just this consistent, constant information. Hey, we're doing a study, and this is what this first step is. 3 months later, here's some additional information, some additional, clear up until, in the end, that mailer was 3/4 of it was all about the project as it kind of slowly led up. But it was just a constant, consistent educational outreach message. And that's what led it to be successful, is because everybody understood. They understood the issues around it. They understood why it needed to happen. They understood the benefits to the community. So by the time the cost and the actual kind of solution and where it was going, everyone said, yeah, we totally understand. You know, it's great that we're actually doing it. Yeah, I'll vote yes for it. So it's that longer process and getting that longer message out. They also had 2 failed bonds before that, so they kind of were learning from it. And it's not like it's something that just kind of dropped from the sky and they're like, okay, we need a new facility. It's something that was in the community discussion for a long time, but then leading up to the successful bond for that one just was a very long, year and a half communication, outreach, and just feeding information, which is what your obligation is to your communities. You're responsible for educating them, giving them the information, not to advocate for what to do, but to give them the information so then they can make the decision of yes or no, or we're going to support a funding one way or another.
And a lot of times that education will also involve the implication of what are the consequences of doing that.
Yeah, 100%.
And that comes out of our assessment. And, we've made some strides with Grace Harbor understanding their system. We need to do that closer with Mason.
Yeah, a big part of that for Skagit, it was doing an analysis which was done for how many inmates would have to be transported down to Snohomish or to Yakima. What was the cost? What's the transfer cost? And since, like Karen said, the majority of those are 75% or even more are pre-sentence, so you're sending them to Yakima, then they're spending the night, and then they're bringing them back for their next court date. And so conveying all of that information, which is part of the, if you vote no, this is what we're going to eventually have to be able to do.
And just one step further, you've experienced, at least here in Shelton, is I guess during the process of educating the community that get started the project, you got flyers, you got everything mailed out, you saw boards put up in different parts of the city, you had community meetings. But it doesn't stop just because you get the go-ahead. And if you notice, the Shelton School District, we've had articles in the paper countless times where we are, pictures, updated pictures. There's a new flyer up. There's constant involvement of the community even after the fact when we're in construction, of keeping them involved in the project. And a good example of this is with the snow a couple of weeks ago. We had concerned citizens coming in and saying to the school board, how are you going to handle this? What are you going to do? I mean, how many times have you had people come in and worry about impact on construction because of snow? It's because you kept the community involved. They're there working with you until the project is done. So it doesn't stop just because you get a yes vote or a pile of money in the bank or a lease deal or whatever it is. It is a constant process of making sure those stakeholders are with you until it's done.
What's the public outreach process differences between the traditional bond route and maybe the alternative funding? There's always going to be that element of, public education and, that kind of thing. But I mean, are there different, plans essentially for either one?
A little bit. I think this is at the very beginning is as soon as we get enough information so we can start seeing some numbers. And what I look at is I haven't investigated, for instance, what is your bonding capacity? What is your capability? What is the risk? I mean, we're going to go through the look at numbers. You're going to put numbers together and what that means. I think that the community, is one where it's just making sure that we take the time to put that stuff out in front of them. I think we have to do about the same thing, whether it's...
It's quite similar, because we work on projects that are done with bonds, just in general, just as a developer. We facilitate the whole design construction process, but they know in the future that they're just gonna do a bond, so we work on projects like that all the time, and it's usually typically the same. There is an education process with, if you do go the lease route, but I think in this situation, just because if there's two counties working together, it lends itself so well to just have one issuer just doing a lease back to the county based on their use of the project and their needs of the project. And so that can be an explainer, and typically it can go, I think there's a speed with doing the lease as opposed to the bond referendum, because you're gonna have to strategically time that bond issue. However, once we get a pretty good cost, that guaranteed not to exceed, even if we have to kind of pad it with some contingency, we can have it funded between 90 and 120 days. And the funds are in there, and it locks in interest rates, which are going up as the Fed keeps raising rates, and same to construction costs. So if you try to speed the process up, and that's part of our education program too, because the voters will say, well, why aren't we? I mean, you're spending our money, why aren't we here? But while we're going through this process, but the speed will ultimately save money, and the program is much more streamlined. So that's a little bit more of an education process. However, I think when we've talked to people, talked to community members in the past, they're like, well, we're saving money, why wouldn't we? Of course we should do this. So that's kind of, one of the slight variations, but also one of the positive and reasons that public agencies go with our program as opposed to funding.
And with that, I mean, if you choose to go that way, and that's what we talked about anyway, is you want to make sure that you actually increase your educational message to the community. Because if you do something and say, oh, we can do this in 120 days, we got all finance, we're ready to go. You don't want your community to turn around and say, so you got around me, you didn't let me vote, you didn't listen to me, you didn't hear me, you went and did your own thing. You don't want that in your community either. So the education process, if you go either way, is you've got to tell them why, the needs, the pluses, the minuses, the good, the bad, and why you've chosen to go. So you're going to go through that process no matter which way you go and try to solve them.
Yeah, and also there's also just that he's completely right, and Also, just like, I just laying out construction costs, because I think we first spoke with Grace Harbor, was it 2 years ago? I think so, and just looking at the construction costs already since then, it's just, if it keeps going down the road, then it's just, that it never gets done, well, it's always too expensive. So at some point, the decision has to be made and solutions have to be made. Montrose, they had a couple suicides in their jail, and they're saying, well, this would have equated one of our lease payments, just the legal fees, or a couple years of lease payments just on the legal fees alone. So if there's, I don't know, I'm not saying there's a problem like that here, but it's just one of the drivers of, you know, you never know, and those lawsuits can also add up too, so.
You know, I'm still going over what you're saying, because I've seen it in a smaller form. If it's a personal owner, you can get past some of the requirements that we have as a governmental entity. If you're doing it in this large form that you're talking about, are there some streamlined processes for purchasing and for other things that would not be the same if it was a straight out county purchase?
We tend to err on the side of using most of the we've been able to get around, you know, having to bid out construction because it's a private owner.
So
there has been ways, but we always say, whatever your process is, you know, let's research it and make sure that you don't have, because in California, where our headquarters is you can't get around a lot of that stuff because the trades will.
Well, there's a lot you still can't hear, but there's some.
Yeah.
If you're able to work with them. And the idea that you're Greatview and Shelton means you are intimate with our, because those are two complete different, I'm no agenda. I gotta tell you, I'm really impressed with the group that you have put together, and the stuff you brought into the room is pretty darn comprehensive. I don't know what to say, I'm taken back by how comprehensive it is.
And when we talked to Bill and Kyle previously, that issue was brought up to us, of whether having to go through the same bid process as we usually do with a private-public partnership. And one of the things that I appreciated is that we were told that where it was at all possible that they would use local vendors for that work, which is huge for us, especially, and Mason County, I assume too, from it being as rural as we both are. That's important to our folks.
Yeah, the local vendors is one of the, and local trades is extremely important when doing bids and when the contractor's coming up with his pricing, because he wants to work with, you know, local trades that want to get the next bid too, so they will bid as low as possible so that they can, you know, be considered for the future bids. So we always, you know, we're not local ourselves, but we always work with, we keep it as local as possible to get those cost benefits and keep all the funds in the community.
And I do want to say, even if it was the lease option, we're not in a position where we can do it without going out on the bond. We just don't have the cash flow for that. So they're connected here, at least, I would say.
And there's really different ways to do that with regard to ensuring that the dollars that are being utilized here are actually being spent within those communities. So there are different ways to be able to deal with creating minimum expectations for localized trades and localized contracts and those types. So those can actually be written into construction contracts, whether it's a bid process or whether it's a privatized process, to be able to kind of ensure that those goals are targets are really work to be able to achieve. And then that allows also the entities to be able to determine, well, there might be a cost associated with that to be able to hit those goals due to amount of competition for those certain trades or, you know, those type of things. So they're all part of a bigger conversation to be able to have, but there are definitely methodologies within this industry to be able to allow that to happen.
I don't know how Mason County Commissioners feel, but I'd like the opportunity to take a look at the Swallowwood facility if that's possible.
You bet. And we actually talked a little bit about, that might have been in one of our previous slides. One thing that we do heavily encourage is to actually do facilities tours. So it sounds like, I don't know if both of the counties have actually gone and toured Skagit County, but we would encourage you to go and tour similar scale, similar type of facilities, just to be able to kind of get those creative juices going. You know, you get so focused on this is how a jail operates, because that's how our jail has operated. It's good for you to kind of see how other facilities have been planned, how they operate, how they function, and from that be able to say, oh, well, I really like this. You know, let's put that in our toolbox. I like this. Maybe let's see if we can implement that. I like that. And being able to kind of steal those, whether they're physical environments or whether they're operational functions, and be able to say, I'd really like to incorporate that as an idea, either whether it's part of the analysis, whether it's part of the forecasting, or whether it's part of the actual program.
Right, and sometimes it's just helpful to see, or an operator will say, we did it this way, but we wish we hadn't. I mean, you know, learn the good stuff, but also learn from the mistakes. And I think Bill and I were talking earlier today that when I have programmed in big jails that have been built, and I gave the example of Lancaster County, which is like in Nebraska, they had a jail downtown, a 600-bed jail out of the downtown, and part of that process, after our first set of meetings, so I kind of knew where I thought we were going, or maybe what the size was going to be. I brought back great, good information with photographs of 3 or 4 facilities that weren't, so ridiculously far away to tour, and then set up in those counties where they were touring those new jails. And we had to go through the jail, and they had jail staff meet with jail people. But the group that went was about 6 or 8 people, a couple elected officials, a county administrator, people from the jail. I think one judge actually came. And then in that community where we went, we started the day off of the tour with a meeting with those, your brother, the elected officials from that county, to say how they got through it. I gave the example of they put it up for a bond referendum in Conroe, Texas, and the bond failed. And then they were under a federal court order, and they had to build a new jail anyways, and that was a very troublesome thing for the elected officials, so they got unelected. They said, you asked us, and we said no, and you had to do it anyways, and they did have to do it anyways. They were under a federal court order that either you build a new jail, or we will build it and operate it, and you just pay the check. But it helps to also talk to other elected officials about how do you get there, how do you fund it, how do you operate it, what would you do differently, especially when sometimes I'm working with a jail with indirect supervision, wanting to move towards direct supervision, meaning a staff person is in a housing unit, and for some people that's uncomfortable, but they can then go in and spend some time at the jail and talk to correctional officers and see how they made that transition. So it's, besides the tour, it's really good to meet with other people and how did they get there, a new jail being taken on tour.
Yeah, if you end up kind of going down the regional jail pathway, you have a wonderful resource with SCORE. It's a minimum, it's a misdemeanor level jail facility. It has 8 participating communities within it, and they have created their regional jail authority that oversees it and manages it and operates it, so you can easily go up there, be able to meet with that board, and be able to say, okay, how did you set it up? How would you do it differently? How has it functioned? And be able to work with that. Penny Bartley was the jail commander, and she was the visionary that really got that project going. She just recently retired from that role as being the jail commander. She could easily be another resource to be able to bring in from an operational standpoint of the pros and cons and how would she do it differently if she had to do it all over again. So, and literally that's just in South Seattle, to be able to go up there and be able to talk with them about how did this work? How could you do it differently? How can we do it to be a little bit more streamlined than what you guys ended up going through, and kind of learn from them. So definitely on the operational side of things and from the elected official side of things, those are other resources that you can take advantage of.
Yeah, and some of the things that we've learned, you mentioned doing a tour of Nisqually. Well, they've come back to us and said, boy, how's it been, 5, 6 years only or something in the 5 years? And they say, we would really like to have more mental health beds in this facility and more focus on substance abuse, counseling and training, and so can we take some of these detention beds and convert those over and create areas for counselors and the nursing station and that sort of thing. And so we're actually currently doing that, and so we would take those lessons learned and apply it to what your needs are in the forecasting and what those needs are and those changing needs in terms of what that population looks like and how we can incorporate restorative components to the facility and have that focus be on restoration and healing and not so much just focused on incarceration. So
I mean, that's one of my passions, and that's something that we would bring to the project.
And the color of that money's different. For
Yeah.
us, we have different pockets that we go after for that kind of money, but also legislative ask and stuff. It's a different opportunity for a partnership. I don't know how it would work together. You guys would have to tell us that. I just can see if we could incorporate that in. There's other monies that.
Yeah, and so that's really well said, because it's not only the right thing to do, but it also makes business sense. Because I know, at least from the tribal component, like with Nisqually, that the color money or the amount of funding that backs up those types of beds is a larger number than the incarceration side. And so I know from a jail management perspective, they've discovered that it makes good business sense to also incorporate that. So it's a win-win all around, and that's why we're actually doing some modification of the facility that's 5 years old.
We also did, I think for us, the education would be a huge piece. You guys do the criminal justice, sales tax revenue, do you guys, the 3/10? Three what?
We did, the city did theirs, we haven't done ours.
Oh, the city did theirs, but the county hasn't.
No.
That was, we did ours in, when we first started collecting it, 17? 17, yeah. And it was, we were very, we took our time in making sure that we educated people, and we had the prosecutor and Sheriff Scott and our presiding judge. We went from community to community to talk about how those dollars would be spent, what we would be using them for in the county, and then teamed up with the cities, because they would take their 40% as well. And so I think in the same respect of a facility like this, I would want to make sure that we do the same type of public outreach and kind of a dog and pony show where you take it around and visit those areas.
For us, that would only generate enough for operational monies, or for what we have still available for people to decide. We have our criminal justice amount of 50 cents over 6 years that is still here that we haven't brought out here. So we have 0.2%. That should be, we mix to do 0.3% for us, and then they'll get more money on the city side. And the criminal justice tax is where the money would come for capital facility, criminal justice, yeah.
I think that education piece is going to be key.
And so kind of as this discussion is, most likely this is going to be to be able to make the project work is going to be a hybrid of different funding solutions. To really be able to make any solution end up working as a whole, you know, whether it's using existing revenue, looking at a bond, general fund piece, maybe even have a portion of privatized. You know, there might be a whole different solutions to be able to kind of bring it all together. You know, work.
Our way, we thought, a year, I thought, make it done and just do it right there.
We could. We'll make break fall out of a seat.
No, I think a hybrid of combination of things is,
Yeah.
I think we would be looking at a multitude of scenarios on funding.
Yeah, I know.
Because it's all gonna come down to what's your revenue streams, and if you have this much revenue and you need that much, it's gonna go into a hybrid solution.
As Kyle mentioned, we have some, depending upon our bond capacity in our county, we also have some bonds that will be paid off in 2022 and 2023, I think, that we, and the thing that I liked about with PFIC is they said, well, we could ramp up and we could have smaller payments until those bonds are paid off and then play catch up after that, which was very attractive to us, and as a component of being able to say, okay, because what we would save in doing that would be much less savings than what we would end up paying if we waited to do the project out many more years down the road.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
In any event, there's no payments during the design and construction. Bonds will be structured the same way, but you won't make any payments until you occupy the facility. So that kind of guarantees that we'll get the project done on time. Otherwise, the contractor is
start paying some of these things themselves, so.
Exactly.
It's a nice little tool, developers have.
Chief, we're trying to.
Oh, I was just gonna make a comment, we're talking about financing and funding and, how much money these projects are gonna cost. I would assume that part of that project is also, we do a staffing analysis, you're gonna try to do projections about what that staffing is gonna cost us every year. Because it's not, the project just doesn't stop once we have a building and the doors open. We gotta make sure that when those doors open, that we have the proper staffing so that we can open up that facility and start utilizing that facility without having to wait 5 or 6 years before we have that, the capability to hire staff and to maintain that.
Well, Bill and I were talking earlier this morning that the housing, of course, housing is 50% of the square footage of a jail or correctional facility. That's so important, and that's where you're gonna have most of your intensive staffing. Someone's gonna run the kitchen, you're gonna have an administrator or a, captain or a supervisor. You're gonna have most of your staff in the housing. So when you start talking about housing, well, what do we need for maximum security, or what do we need for minimum security, dorms, double rooms, single rooms, whatever that's laid out or kind of concept, it's very important. And I just use like literally red dots to say first, second, and third shift, or are you on 3 shifts or 2? 12, forget it, 12 shift, to say exactly where those dots go, so that a simple decision about one housing type over another could be, one 12-hour shift person. That's really, you gotta hire almost 6 people to cover that, 365 days a year. So the staffing, which goes on and on, is absolutely critical, and particularly in the housing area, and look at that, and develop housing options.
Because at the end of the day, if we don't have money to staff it, then there's no sense in building facilities. Right.
That has happened in this country.
Yeah,
There have been
well,
jails
it's
that
happened
are.
right next door.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay, well, now I got another example.
It's fresh on everybody.
I worked over there during that time, and I'll tell you that the administration over there, not all of them are 100% in support of that jail, because they had no assurances that they were gonna have the staffing levels they needed. And so that was a project that went up and down for a lot of years, and when it came out, the administration, the sheriff's office correct, they never got the money that they needed for staffing, and it sat there for all those years. And I wouldn't surprise that it cost a lot of money to have it sit there as well, but those are things that I'm glad you covered, some of those other things that haven't been through this one.
I mean, the staffing analysis is enormous, especially when you start getting to concept design and planning. Obviously you're familiar with Skagit County. When that was done looking at the highest and best use of expanding the existing facility, it essentially doubled the bed capacity, but it also increased the required amount of staff by like 120%. So, but then as soon as they went to a greenfield site, due to being able to do very efficient planning and looking at a hybrid solution for direct and indirect supervision, they doubled the bed capacity and they had it only 10% staff. So that ended up being another aspect of the overall financing and cost, because it was such a much better deal. Even though the capital cost was a wash, the operational cost was drastically different. So looking at those decisions, and that's something that comes with KUV's history of designing correctional facilities. We're never going to design an inefficient facility that we cannot operate. That's not how we approach these things.
Any other questions or comments?
Thank you guys.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, it was a pleasure to come and present to you all.
Seconds early.
This is a very interesting opportunity.